My uncle's will was a slap in the face. My cousin got the mansion, the business, everything. All I got was a dusty old antique music box. Little did I know, it held a secret that would shatter their perfect world. The day my Uncle George's will was read dawned with a stark, almost clinical brightness. Cold sunlight sliced through the tall, arched windows of sterling and black, the kind of law office that smelled of old money and unspoken secrets. I sat perched on the edge of a plush, uncomfortable chair in the corner, watching my cousin Richard pace the room. His tailored suit looked like it had been personally blessed by a Wall Street guru, and his swagger practically vibrated off the mahogany paneling. He was already acting like he owned the place, which, if I was being brutally honest with myself, he probably did. "Are we ready to proceed?" Mr. Thompson, the lawyer, asked, his voice cutting through the tense silence. I nodded, my grip tightening on the arms of the leather chair. At 32, I was about to get a very clear picture of what my Uncle George really thought of me. The constant comparisons to Richard throughout our lives had already painted a pretty vivid picture, but I guess I was still holding on to a sliver of hope. Mr. Thompson adjusted his tie and began to read. To my son Richard, for his unwavering dedication to Hayes Tech and his commitment to maintaining the family legacy. He went on to list assets that made my head spin. The sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, controlling shares in Hayes Tech, the very tech company my grandfather had built from the ground up, and a diversified investment portfolio worth more money than I could fathom. With each item, Richard's smirk grew wider, a predatory grin that always made my stomach churn. Then came my part. To my niece, Emily, Mr. Thompson paused, shuffling his papers as if the words themselves were difficult to pronounce. I leave the antique music box currently located in the study of my residence. The room fell silent. Even Richard seemed momentarily stunned, though it quickly morphed into a poorly concealed snort of laughter. "A music box?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just a music box." "It was your Aunt Clara's favorite, Mr. Pema," Thompson offered weakly, clearly uncomfortable with the blatant disparity. He avoided my gaze, focusing instead on the papers in his hands. Richard finally found his voice, walking over to clap me on the shoulder, his grip just a little too tight. "Don't worry, Em," he said, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "I'm sure I can find you a nice little role at Hayes Tech, maybe in the archives. You always did like old things." He punctuated his joke with another condescending chuckle. I shrugged off his hand, a wave of resentment washing over me. The Hayes family fortune, built over generations, now belonged almost entirely to Richard. All I had was a dusty old music box that my Aunt Clara had picked up at some antique fair years ago. I'd always thought it was pretty, with its intricate carvings and delicate melody, but it wasn't exactly a fair inheritance. "Is that all?" I asked Mr. Thompson, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. He nodded sympathetically. "The music box must be collected within 7 days." I stood up without another word, ignoring Richard's calls of "see you at the office, cousin," echoing behind me. The drive to my uncle's apartment, now Richard's apartment, felt surreal. The doorman, who had known me since I was a child, gave me a hesitant nod, a flicker of pity in his eyes. Inside, the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, met me with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Emily, dear," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "It's not right what they did to you." I hugged her back, fighting my own tears. Mrs. Gable had been more of a mother to me than my own had sometimes. She helped me locate the music box in the study, carefully lifting it from its display case. It was heavier than I remembered, the dark wood cool and smooth beneath my fingertips. "Your Aunt Clara used to spend hours looking at this," Mrs. Gable said softly, wrapping it in a protective cloth, "especially in the last few months. Sometimes she'd mutter about notes and sequences. We just thought the illness was making her confused." I looked at the music box more closely in the fading light of the study. The carvings, intricate depictions of musical instruments and swirling patterns seemed more detailed than I recalled. Notes and sequences. The words echoed in my mind. Could there be more to this seemingly insignificant inheritance than met the eye? Back in my small apartment, the music box sat on the mantelpiece, looking like an out-of-place relic in my otherwise modern decor. It was beautiful in its own way, the dark wood gleaming softly under the lamplight, the carvings intricate and detailed. but it was still just a music box. A reminder of what I hadn't received, a tangible representation of my perceived worth in my uncle's eyes. Mrs. Gable came over later that evening, bringing with her a casserole and a comforting presence. She'd been a fixture in our family since I was a baby, a warm and steady presence who had always offered a listening ear and a kind word. Tonight, her usual cheerfulness was subdued, replaced by a quiet sympathy. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right, dear," she said, her eyes lingering on the music box. "That old thing, your Aunt Clara loved it so much." "I remember," I said, running my fingers over the smooth wood. "She always kept it on her bedside table." "She did, Mrs. Gable agreed, settling onto my sofa. "She'd wind it up and just listen, especially towards the end. Those last few months were hard." She sighed softly. "Sometimes she'd talk about the music, about hidden notes and sequences. We thought it was just the illness, making her mind wander." Hidden notes and sequences. The phrase struck a chord with me. I looked at the carvings again, really looked at them this time. There were depictions of various musical instruments, a violin, a flute, a harp, intertwined with swirling, almost abstract patterns. Some of the lines seemed a little too deliberate, a little too precise to be purely decorative. It was as if there was another layer to the design, something almost coded. Later that night, after Mrs. Gable had left, I found myself drawn back to the music box. I placed it under the direct light of my desk lamp and examined it inch by inch. The carvings were incredibly detailed, but as I traced the lines with my fingertip, I started to notice subtle inconsistencies. A slight indentation here, a barely perceptible symbol there, almost hidden within the larger design. They weren't immediately obvious, but once I started looking for them, they seemed to be everywhere. My phone buzzed, jolting me out of my focused observation. It was a voicemail notification from Richard. I hesitated for a moment before playing it. "Emily," his voice boomed through the tiny speaker, laced with a smug satisfaction that made my teeth clench. "Just wanted to check in. Hope you're enjoying your heirloom. Maybe you can pawn it for a few bucks and buy yourself a decent meal. Don't worry too much about that job offer in archives, though. I'm sure something will open up in janitorial soon. Keep your chin up, cousin." He ended with a hearty, arrogant laugh. I deleted the voicemail without responding. His condescending attitude only fueled my growing suspicion about the music box. Why would he be so dismissive of something that had been so important to Aunt Clara? Unless he knew something I didn't. I opened my laptop and started researching antique music boxes. I searched for similar designs, for makers who might have used such intricate carvings. But I found nothing. The music box seemed unique, unlike anything I could find online. It was as if it had appeared out of thin air. Then a memory flickered in the back of my mind. Something from one of my art history classes. We had briefly touched upon the idea of hidden messages in art and artifacts, a practice that dated back centuries. Sometimes artists and craftsmen would subtly incorporate symbols or codes into their work, conveying secret meanings to those who knew how to look. And then it hit me. The seemingly random swirls and lines in the carvings. They weren't random at all. They resembled a form of musical notation I had once studied, a system where notes were represented by specific symbols in their placement within a pattern. Could it be? Could Aunt Clara have hidden a message within the music box, disguised as mere decoration? The thought sent a shiver of excitement and anticipation down my spine. This wasn't just a worthless antique. It could be something much, much more. For the next few hours, my apartment transformed into a makeshift decoding station. I spread out a large sheet of paper and began sketching the intricate carvings of the music box, meticulously focusing on the recurring symbols. There were small, stylized depictions of musical notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, even what looked like 16th notes, cleverly integrated into the swirling patterns and the bodies of the carved instruments. They were so subtly placed that anyone not specifically looking for them would likely dismiss them as mere decorative flourishes. As I continued to sketch, the realization solidified in my mind. Aunt Clara hadn't just loved music. She had used it as a language, a way to conceal a message in plain sight. The arrangement of the symbols wasn't random. There was a deliberate pattern, a sequence that seemed to flow across the surface of the music box. I tried various approaches to decipher the code. I considered the possibility that the notes formed a melody, but the sequence seemed too fragmented and lacked a clear rhythm. Then I remembered another detail from my art history studies. Sometimes musical notation was used to represent letters or numbers, each note corresponding to a specific character. I spent what felt like an eternity trying different combinations, assigning letters to notes based on various historical cipher systems. Frustration began to creep in. The symbols were complex, and the possibilities seemed endless. I took a break, pacing my small living room, the image of Richard's smug face flashing in my mind. His sudden interest in my worthless inheritance was a glaring red flag. He knew something. He had to. Just as I was about to return to my decoding efforts, a sharp knock echoed through my apartment. It was late, well past midnight. Who would be visiting at this hour? I peered through the peephole. My blood ran cold. It was Richard. His usually perfectly coiffed hair was disheveled, his face etched with an anxiety I had never seen before. "Emily," he called out, his voice strained. "Open up. We need to talk about the music box." I stayed silent, my heart pounding in my chest. Richard had never shown the slightest interest in art or antiques. Why was he here in the middle of the night asking about a supposedly worthless music box? "Emily, please." His voice took on an edge of desperation I had never heard before. "Uncle George, he left some additional instructions. About the music box. You need to give it to me." Instructions? What kind of instructions? My suspicion intensified. "Go away, Richard," I called through the door, my voice trembling slightly. "The music box is mine. It's all I got, remember?" "You don't understand," he hissed, his voice low and urgent. "That music box, it's not what you think. Just give it to me now and I'll give you $5 million. $5 million? For a music box he had laughed about just hours ago? My mind raced. Richard was many things, arrogant, entitled, ruthless, but he wasn't stupid with money. If he was offering that much, the music box must be worth far more than I could ever imagine. I backed away from the door, my thoughts swirling. What could possibly be so valuable about this old music box? Was it filled with jewels? Did it contain some kind of secret document? I heard him fumbling with something outside the door. Keys? Did he still have a copy of my spare key from when I'd been sick last year? A wave of panic washed over me. I quickly grabbed his music box from my desk and ran to my bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it just as I heard the distinct click of my front door opening. "Emily," Richard's voice echoed through my apartment, closer now, laced with a menacing tone I had never heard directed at me before. "Where are you? Where's the music box?" I held the music box close to my chest, my hands shaking in the dim light filtering through my bedroom window. The carved symbols seemed to almost glow faintly in the darkness. And then I saw it, a pattern I had missed before. The seemingly random placement of the notes wasn't random at all. They formed a distinct sequence, a recognizable musical phrase. It wasn't a complete melody, but a short, repeating motif. Remembering Mrs. Gable's words about Aunt Clara, muttering about notes and sequences, a sudden realization dawned on me. What if the symbols weren't meant to be read as a cipher? What if they were meant to be played? I fumbled for my phone, quickly opening a virtual piano app. With trembling fingers, I began to tap out the notes corresponding to the symbols I had identified on the music box. As I played the sequence, a short, haunting melody filled the quiet of my bedroom. It was simple, almost childlike, but there was something strangely familiar about it. And as the last note faded, a faint click echoed from the music box in my hands. Had I just unlocked something? The faint click that emanated from the music box sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I held my breath, my eyes scanning the intricate carvings for any sign of movement. Nothing seemed outwardly different, but I had a feeling something had shifted internally. I ran my fingers along the edges of the music box, searching for a seam or a hidden latch. My fingers snagged on a barely perceptible gap along the bottom edge. It was so subtle I almost missed it, a hairline fracture in the otherwise seamless wood. With painstaking care, I tried to pry it open. The wood was old and stiff, but after a few tense moments, a small section of the base gave way, revealing a dark recess inside. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached into the opening. My fingers brushed against something thin and papery. I carefully pulled it out. It was a small, folded piece of paper, yellowed with age but still intact. My name, Emily, was written on the front in elegant, familiar handwriting, Aunt Clara's handwriting. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. The ink was slightly faded, but the words were clear. My dearest Emily, if you are reading this, then you have discovered what I always knew you would. You see patterns others miss. You question what others accept. And now, my darling girl, you are about to understand why your father and brother have always been so afraid of you. The words sent a shiver down my spine. Afraid of me? Why would my uncle and Richard be afraid of me? The pounding on my bedroom door grew louder, more frantic. Emily, open this door, now! Richard's voice was a raw snarl of desperation. I barely heard him. My eyes were glued to the letter, my mind racing. The music box is more than just a sentimental keepsake. It holds the key to a truth that has been buried for far too long. The seemingly random notes you deciphered are not random at all. They are a coding, a sequence that will unlock more than just a hidden compartment. They will lead you to the coordinates of a place your uncle and Richard desperately want to keep hidden. A place that holds the proof of their lies and the foundation of their ill-gotten fortune. My breath caught in my throat. Lies? Ill-gotten fortune? What was Aunt Clara talking about? Richard's furious shouts continued from the other side of the door. Emily, I swear, if you don't open this door, you'll regret it. I ignored him, my focus entirely on the letter. Hayes Tech, the empire your grandfather built. It wasn't built entirely on his own ingenuity. Your uncle and Richard have systematically stolen innovations, patents, and designs from brilliant minds over the years, taking credit for work that was never theirs. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Hayes Tech, the company that defined our family, the source of Richard's arrogance and my uncle's power, was built on stolen ideas. I was one of those minds, Emily, your Aunt Clara. I poured my heart and soul into developing technologies that would have revolutionized the industry, only to have my ideas taken, my contributions erased, my spirit crushed. Tears welled up in my eyes as I read those words. Aunt Clara, the kind, gentle woman I had always known, had been a victim of their greed and deceit, but I wouldn't let them get away with it completely. Before my illness took hold, I made sure to document everything, every stolen idea, every act of betrayal, and I hid the evidence knowing that one day someone with your intelligence and your unwavering sense of justice would uncover the truth. The music box was my way of ensuring that my story would be told. The musical sequence you played will lead you to a hidden laboratory, a place where I kept all the proof. The coordinates are encoded within the melody. You need to find it, Emily. You need to expose them. Richard's banging on the door intensified, the wood rattling in its frame. Emily, I'm not asking anymore. Open this damn door. Go away, Richard, I thought fiercely, clutching the letter to my chest. This is my inheritance now, and I know exactly what I need to do with it. Aunt Clara's final words in the letter were both a warning and an affirmation. Be careful, my dear Emily. Your uncle and Richard will stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But trust your instincts. You are stronger than you know. You were always meant for something more. The pounding on the door seemed to shake the entire apartment, but I barely noticed. I was too busy absorbing the weight of Aunt Clara's words, the shocking truth that had just been revealed. The worthless music box wasn't worthless at all. It was a key to a hidden past, a stolen legacy, and a future I never could have imagined. And Richard, still shouting and threatening outside my door, had no idea what I now held in my hands. My mind was racing, trying to process everything I had just read. Aunt Clara's revelations were staggering, painting a picture of my family that was both shocking and heartbreaking. But there was no time to dwell on the emotional impact. Richard was still pounding on my bedroom door, and I knew I had to act fast. My first instinct was to secure the evidence. I carefully placed Aunt Clara's letter back inside the music box and then grabbed my phone. I systematically photographed every inch of the music box, making sure to capture the intricate carvings and the specific arrangement of the musical note symbols from every possible angle. This would be my backup, my proof, in case Richard managed to get his hands on the original. Next, I retrieved the virtual piano app on my phone and replayed the short, haunting melody I had deciphered earlier. As the last note faded, I focused on the sequence, trying to see if there was any other layer of meaning hidden within it. Aunt Clara's letter had mentioned coordinates. Could the notes themselves correspond to numbers or letters that would pinpoint a location? I spent the next hour meticulously transcribing the musical sequence onto paper, experimenting with different interpretations. I tried assigning numerical values to the notes based on their position on the musical scale, then converting those numbers to latitude and longitude coordinates. It was a painstaking process filled with trial and error, but finally, a set of numbers emerged that looked like they could be geographical coordinates. Just as I finished writing them down, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mrs. Gable. "Emily, dear, are you all right? There are men here at the house, taking away all of your Aunt Clara's things. They seem to be searching for something in her study. Please be careful." Mrs. Gable's message sent a fresh wave of urgency through me. They were already trying to erase Aunt Clara's existence, to bury her secrets. I had to move quickly. According to the coordinates I had deciphered, the hidden laboratory was located somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains, about a 3-hour drive from the city. Aunt Clara's letter had mentioned that she purchased the property under her maiden name, keeping it hidden from my uncle and Richard. The lab itself, she wrote, was underground, with an entrance disguised as an old well. The first sequence of notes from the music box she had indicated would be the key to gaining access. I threw some clothes, my laptop, the music box, carefully wrapped in a blanket, and Aunt Clara's letter into a duffel bag. As I headed towards my car, keys in hand, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street, its engine running. My stomach clenched. Richard wasn't giving up. The drive out of the city was tense. The black SUV stayed behind me for the first hour, maintaining a consistent distance. I took every detour and back road I could think of, weaving through suburban streets and onto winding country lanes. Finally, somewhere near the Massachusetts border, I managed to lose them. I checked my rearview mirror repeatedly, but the black SUV was nowhere to be seen. By the time I reached the coordinates, the first rays of dawn were painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. The property looked abandoned at first glance, just an overgrown field dotted with wildflowers, an old, dilapidated farmhouse in severe disrepair, and a scattering of weathered outbuildings. But as I walked the grounds, comparing the landscape to the descriptions in Aunt Clara's letter, I began to see the patterns. The seemingly random arrangement of trees and rocks, they matched the swirling patterns on the music box perfectly. Aunt Clara's genius was breathtaking. The old well was exactly where the music box seemed to indicate, nestled amongst a cluster of overgrown bushes. Its rusted metal cover looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Taking a deep breath, I approached it. There was no visible lock or handle, just a smooth, weathered surface. Then I noticed a series of small indentations around the edge, arranged in a familiar pattern. The first sequence of musical notes from the music box. With trembling fingers, I pressed the indentations in the correct order, mimicking the melody I had played on my phone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft grinding sound, the rusted cover of the well began to retract, revealing a dark, gaping hole and a narrow staircase descending into the darkness below. Motion sensor lights flickered on as I made my way down, the air growing cooler and heavier with each step. I could hear the faint hum of ventilation systems in the distance. At the bottom of the stairs, another keypad awaited. This time I knew I would need the second sequence from the music box. The hidden laboratory was just beyond, and I was about to uncover the truth that my uncle and Richard had fought so hard to keep buried. At the bottom of the staircase, another keypad glowed faintly in the dim light. This time the sequence required was longer, more complex. It took me a few tries, carefully referencing the musical notes I had transcribed, but finally, with a soft click, a heavy door slid open, revealing the laboratory that had been hidden beneath the unassuming field. Stepping inside felt like crossing into another dimension. The air was sterile and cool, carrying the low hum of sophisticated machinery. Pristine white walls gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights, reflecting rows upon rows of advanced equipment in banks of silent computers. It was a stark contrast to the dilapidated farmhouse above, a secret sanctuary of scientific innovation hidden in plain sight. But what truly caught my eye was the far wall, which was covered in framed patents and meticulously documented prototypes. Dozens of innovations that I recognized instantly from Hayes Tech products. But there was one crucial difference. Each one bore Aunt Clara's original signature, her name proudly displayed as the inventor. "Oh my God," I whispered, moving closer to examine them. These weren't just similar to Hayes Tech's technology, they were the originals. My aunt hadn't just been a passive observer in the company, she had been its hidden genius, the wellspring of their most successful creations. A familiar voice from behind me made my blood run cold. "Impressive, isn't it?" I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Standing in the doorway, looking exactly as I remembered him, was my Uncle George. Or rather, the man we had all mourned just a few weeks ago. Beside him stood Richard, a smug, satisfied smirk plastered across his face. "Did you really think your mother was the only one who knew about this place?" my uncle asked, stepping further into the lab. He looked remarkably well for someone who had supposedly succumbed to a sudden heart attack. "Though I must admit," he continued, his eyes scanning the room, "hiding the coordinates in that music box was clever. We've been searching for this facility for months." I backed away, clutching Aunt Clara's letter like a shield. You're supposed to be dead." My uncle offered a chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sometimes, Emily, the best way to find something is to make people stop looking for it. Your mother's death was unfortunate, but mine, well, let's just say it served its purpose." The will reading, I realized, the pieces clicking into place. "It was a trap. You wanted me to find the music box. We needed you to bring it here," Richard explained, moving to block the exit. "Mom changed all the security protocols before she passed. We couldn't get in without the codes. And you, dear cousin, unwittingly provided them." "And now," my uncle said, advancing slowly, his gaze hard and calculating, "you're going to help us destroy everything in this lab. All evidence of your mother's work will disappear, and Hayes Tech's patents will remain secure." But they had made one crucial mistake. While they had been gloating, explaining their elaborate deception, I had been subtly backing towards a large central workstation. Aunt Clara's letter had mentioned an emergency protocol, a sequence of notes that would activate something she called the Clarity Protocol. "Actually," I said, reaching behind me and placing my fingers on the control panel, ready to input the sequence, "I don't think I will." The lab's bright lights suddenly shifted to a pulsing, ominous red. A computerized voice, calm and authoritative, filled the room. "Clarity Protocol activated. Broadcasting evidence to all major news outlets and regulatory agencies. Deletion impossible." My uncle's face contorted with rage. "What have you done?" "Mom called it her insurance policy," I said, feeling a surge of strength with each word. "Every piece of evidence in this lab has just been transmitted to hundreds of secure locations. Patents, proof of theft, fraudulent documents, everything. Hayes Tech is about to face some very uncomfortable questions." Richard lunged forward, but it was too late. Alarms began blaring and heavy steel shutters slammed down, sealing all exits. We were locked in together, trapped with the truth that would destroy their carefully constructed empire. "She knew," I continued, watching the color drain from their faces as the alarms blared relentlessly. "She knew you would try to bury her contributions, just like you buried her innovations. So she made sure the truth would come out, one way or another." Through the small reinforced windows of the lab, I could see flashing blue and red lights approaching. Someone, likely the lab's automated security system, had alerted the local authorities. My uncle and Richard exchanged panicked glances as the sound of sirens grew louder. Closer. The painting, or rather the music box that had started it all, still sat wrapped in its blanket near the entrance, a silent witness to the unraveling of their carefully constructed lies. Those seemingly insignificant musical notes had led me exactly where I needed to be. Aunt Clara's final gift wasn't just a music box, it was justice, set to a haunting melody. And as I watched my uncle and Richard finally grasp the magnitude of their impending downfall, a grim satisfaction settled within me. This was just the beginning. The real story of Hayes Tech was about to be told. The next 48 hours were a blur of police statements, news reports, and corporate chaos. I watched from my sparsely furnished hotel room as Hayes Tech's stock plummeted, years of carefully constructed lies crumbling in real time. "Hayes Tech CEO found alive, arrested for fraud," one headline screamed. "Corporate giant built on stolen patents," another declared. "Aunt Clara's revenge." the hidden genius behind Hayes Tech. My phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story broke. Journalists, lawyers, former employees, everyone wanted to hear my side of the story. But I was only interested in one call. Finally, my phone buzzed with a familiar number. It was Mrs. Gable. Her voice, usually so warm and comforting, was thick with emotion. "Emily, dear," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Your Aunt Clara. She knew this day would come. She told me, she made me promise to give you this after the truth came out." An hour later, I sat in Mrs. Gable's small, cozy living room, holding another letter from Aunt Clara. This one felt different. It wasn't filled with instructions or coordinates. This one felt personal. "My dearest Emily," it began, "now that you know this truth about Hayes Tech, it's time you understood your own history. You were never less than your cousin Richard. You were always meant for something more." As I read on, the pieces of my life slowly began to shift into focus. Aunt Clara hadn't just been another victim of my uncle's schemes. She had been playing a long game, preparing me for this moment from the very beginning. Those art history classes I had insisted on taking, the ones my uncle had scoffed at as a waste of time, they hadn't been a waste at all. They had trained my eye to spot patterns, to understand hidden meanings in plain sight. My work in antique restoration, my passion for preserving the past, it had taught me patience, precision, and the ability to reconstruct truth from fragments. "Every time your father pushed you away from the business," Aunt Clara wrote, "every time he favored Richard, he was unknowingly helping to prepare you for this moment. You learned to think differently, to see what others missed. While Richard was learning to maintain the lies, you were learning to expose them." A knock at Mrs. Gable's door interrupted my reading. A woman in a crisp, professional suit stood outside holding a briefcase. "Miss Carter?" she asked politely. "I'm Alexandra Chin from the Securities and Exchange Commission. We need to discuss your Aunt Clara's patents." The next few hours with Alexandra Chin were a crash course in just how meticulously Aunt Clara had planned everything. She hadn't just documented the stolen patents. She had continued inventing, working in secret in her underground lab right up until the end. The music box's coordinates had led not only to evidence of past theft, but to a treasure trove of innovations that could transform the entire tech industry. "Your aunt filed these patents under a trust," Alexandra explained, spreading a thick stack of documents across Mrs. Gable's coffee table. "A trust that names you as the sole beneficiary." My hands trembled as I looked at the paperwork. Dozens of patents, each one legally protected, all now belonging to me. And these weren't just the old innovations my uncle had stolen. These were new ones, years ahead of current technology. I recognized some of the concepts from Aunt Clara's lab. Groundbreaking advancements in artificial intelligence, revolutionary energy, storage solutions, and designs for devices I couldn't even fully comprehend. "Hayes Tech doesn't just owe you restitution for the stolen patents," Alexandra continued, her tone serious. "They've built their entire infrastructure around your aunt's technology. They can't operate without it." "So what does that mean?" I asked, though a dawning understanding was beginning to form in my mind. Alexandra leaned forward. "It means, Miss Carter, that you now effectively control the company that cast you aside." The realization was staggering. While my uncle and Richard sat in jail awaiting trial, I, the forgotten niece, the one deemed unworthy of the family legacy, was now in a position to dictate the future of Hayes Tech. The irony was almost comical. The next morning, I walked into Hayes Tech's headquarters, not as the ignored relative, but as the majority shareholder, the one holding all the cards. The board of directors, desperate to salvage the company from complete collapse and the looming threat of countless lawsuits, had no choice but to accept my terms. They were polite, almost obsequious, their earlier arrogance replaced by a palpable fear of what I might do. Standing in my uncle's former office, a space that had always felt intimidating and off-limits, I found one last surprise. Behind the large, abstract painting that had hung above his desk, there was a wall safe cleverly concealed. The combination, I realized with the jolt, was the final sequence of musical notes from Aunt Clara's music box. Inside the safe, nestled among some old financial documents, was a personal diary. Aunt Clara's familiar handwriting filled its pages, detailing every innovation my uncle had stolen, every inventor he had betrayed, but more importantly, it contained a list of names. People like my mother, brilliant minds who had been cheated out of their rightful recognition. As I read through the entries, a new sense of purpose solidified within me. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about righting the wrongs of the past and building a future based on honesty and integrity. 1 month later, I stood on a stage at a hastily convened press conference, the Hayes Tech logo behind me now replaced with the sleek, modern design of Aurora Innovations. This company was built on stolen dreams, I told the assembled crowd, my voice clear and steady. Today, we begin making things right. I announced the establishment of the Clara Hayes Foundation, dedicated to compensating every inventor who had been wronged by the previous management. More than that, we were transforming the company into what it should have been all along, an incubator for innovation, where brilliant minds are celebrated, not exploited. The music box that started it all now hangs in my new office, a constant reminder that sometimes the most valuable things are hidden in plain sight. The musical notes that once concealed my aunt's secret now represent something else, the pattern of a better future, one built on truth instead of lies. Richard wrote to me from prison, his letters alternating between pathetic pleas for help and thinly veiled threats. I sent back a single photograph. The music box, now hanging exactly where our uncle's imposing portrait used to be. He understood the message. His world of deception was over. My uncle maintained his silence, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth he had fought so hard to bury was now his legacy. Late one evening as I was preparing to leave the office, Mrs. Gable brought me one final letter from Aunt Clara. This one had been timed to arrive exactly 1 month after the company's transformation began. My darling Emily, it read, if you are reading this, you have done more than just expose the truth. You have begun to rebuild from the ashes of deception. I never wanted you to inherit a corrupt empire. I wanted you to have the chance to build something honest, something worthy of your heart. I traced my fingers over her handwriting, feeling closer to her than ever before. The worthless music box had been anything but. It had been the key to everything. More than that, it had been Aunt Clara's way of showing me that I had inherited something far more valuable than money or status, her vision for a better world.